Juan, thank you for joining us. Let's start with some of the basics. If you can introduce your name, what company or organization you work for, and your job title.
So thank you for having me. My name is Juan Anderson. I am a software development engineer for Capital Group, which is a large asset manager. They're a large financial company. And so I spend most of my day-to-day effectively building software, designing new systems and delivering them, improving them, so on and so forth.
What would you say that your company does? What kind of products or what kind of services do they provide to their customers?
So as an asset manager, Capital Group is what's called a buy-side firm that they go out and invest. And they do this by getting cash from investors. And so, for example, anybody who wants to can try to open up an account and then actually invest in Capital Group. And Capital Group sells a suite of what's called a mutual fund, which is just a investment vehicle. Think of it as kind of like a bucket of a bunch of money, and that they have managers that pick and choose different stocks or bonds to buy. And then the hope is that over the long term, there's some return so that the investments appreciate in value, and that if you've invested in there, therefore your money is also appreciated in value. So that is the very simplest is what they do. We also now sell ETFs as well, which is like another type of a fund.
ETS?
ETF, exchange traded funds. I think you might have heard of, if anyone's heard of ARK, Cathie Wood. That's another mutual. That's an ETF that's very popular right now. And so Capital Group actually just recently launched ETFs as well.
Your organization deals with a lot of money management, wealth creation, investing, things like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so your job title, a software developer or development engineer, what does that mean, and what is that role within your company and organization?
I'm really glad you asked it. It's a very, very, really on the surface, right? It's very vague. Software development engineer could really mean a lot of things. And it actually is there are a lot within the software engineering space, within the technology space. Being a software engineer actually doesn't really say that much, doesn't tell you much what they do day to day. So you have some engineers who they work on what you visually see. So like, for example, a browser or a web page, when you go to anywhere, Google, you click a new website, that page, that's called the front end in technology space. So you have some engineers who build those, right? So they work on designing and building websites effectively. And then there's a whole behind the scenes set of things that's called the back end, that is everything that powers that website. So everything that runs the calculations, and when you're in Google Drive and you create a new file, that gets sent to the back end to their systems to get processed. And so what I do in my day to day is I often kind of do both those depending on what needs to be done. I'll sometimes do what's front end, so I'll work on like web pages, but I'll also do a lot of what's called the back end, which is more around data processing, running calculations, and so on, so things around that nature. And so I work with very large systems, a lot of different entities, or different entities that communicate with one another, different systems that talk to each other. And so I help them to get to speak to one another, and I help if they're for some reason something's broken and they're not able to communicate, I go ahead and try to fix that as well. So those are some of the things I do in my day to day.
It's really interesting. The word engineering, oftentimes I think for those of us who are not in the world of engineering, oftentimes we think of people who are physically building maybe bridges and roads, but this is another kind of engineering. It's computer engineering is what it is, right? Computer science.
Exactly, yeah. So it really is you're still a builder, but you're not building necessarily anything that you can, anything physical. That you're not building a bridge, or you're not building a wall or a house, but you are building really complex at times software and different systems that communicate with one another. And there's a lot of math involved. There can be quite a bit of math involved. There is quite a bit of just kind of capture different moving pieces. When it comes to the software space, there are a lot of different nuances with how things are connected, how they communicate, and what's called the flow, the control flow. So when you click a button, that sets off a cascade of reactions, and so that holds a whole flow, and then there's a logical flow. So I click enter, I want to send whatever I've done, pushed it to the next to that backend system and kick off a process. So it is very interesting in that I think there are similarities involved, that you're still building, you're still designing, and you go through a lot of reviews, much as you had with traditional, with more traditional engineering or not computer science engineering. But then there is that kind of difference where it is all about computers now, right? And it's all about software.
Yeah, yeah. Do you do a lot of coding in the work that you do?
I do quite a bit of coding and actually quite a bit of writing. I write a lot of documentation, and I present quite a bit as well. And then I speak with other engineers about, is this the best approach? Is this are there better solutions? So there's a lot of collaboration, particularly at Capital Group in general, as a company kind of wide focus, but also in my day-to-day, in what I do as a software engineer, collaboration is vital. So it's a role that I find myself constantly interacting with new people, different teams, and all. It's really a learning day to day.
What made you decide to go into this field?
Oh gosh, it's hard for me to pin down one moment, but actually I do want to go back in high school. I began to kind of get an interest into technology, and I had no idea that it would eventually lead me to be to be in the role I am now as a software engineer. But I was very curious. For example, I think my junior year, I began to kind of wonder how does a browser work? How is it that I open up Google Chrome, I type in Google or search something and it works? And I was curious, what actually happens? How does that function? It's such a big part of our lives. Is we have supercomputers in our pockets now. But it wasn't really a question up until high school. I began to wonder, how does that work? That kind of stayed in the back of my mind until college, where I think by my middle of college, I realized that maybe I should take a couple courses on this, and I should ask my professors and see what they have to say about how does this actually work, coming in from a programming perspective. So I'd never really programmed before that time, before that college experience, but I had a really big interest in technology, and I had tried to learn a lot on my own just from searching. And then eventually, by the I took an internship as a software engineer, and working with software, and I turned out I really liked it.
I'm going to actually go over to some of the chat questions, and yes, students or teachers, if you're moderating from your classroom, please feel free to put in any questions in the chat or in the Q&A. There is a question, and the question is, what is the average salary of a software engineer?
Wow, it's a really big range. It depends on quite a bit. As I mentioned earlier, software engineer is a really broad term. It says a lot, but doesn't say that much. It tells you the space you're in, but as I mentioned earlier, you can work on different aspects of technology. There's that front end aspect, what's called the back end aspect, and then there are also different even programming languages. So that as a software engineer, you can be what's called a Go programmer. So Go is one programming language, and that you work exclusively in that one. So there are pretty broad pay scales, at least that I've seen. But I was trying to look up before this to kind of give a good answer on what the average salary is. And the best range, at least I've seen, is about anything from between 60K to 200 plus K. I've heard some stories about that, but it depends again on where you're working, what you're doing, and a confluence of other factors like your educational background, and just so on and so forth. So it's quite a big range in terms of salary.
Can you describe a typical day on the job?
Oh gosh, this is difficult, but I can. This is also one of the reasons why I like the role I'm in right now. It changes. I don't have a really consistent day to day aside from, I guess, some of these I'll mention now. Usually my morning involves meeting up with my teammates. So we get on a call together, and we're all in different areas. So this is very distributed. Some of us are in different time zones too, but we get on a call together and we kind of discuss what we've been working on yesterday. So what we progressed on, we share with each other any kind of new things we've learned, we picked up, or that we want to make each other aware of. So this could be, I found an issue in this part of our code base. I'll be working on that, or I found a limitation and that we should consider it, or it's just simply, hey, can someone please help me? I'm a little stuck on this, and one of our teammates will often say, yeah, let's discuss this, let's work on this together. So my morning is almost always a collaboration, a sync up of where we find out what happens. And then throughout the day, it's very my day-to-day changes up quite a bit. I find I work with a lot of different teams and a lot of different people, and I work on a lot of different projects. So sometimes I'll have an hour, 2 hour long meetings where we're coding together, where we're chatting, designing together. And other days I'll have 4 hours to myself for me to code, just to work on my code, to work on my maybe building something new, trying to prove a new concept, or seeing if something's worth it, or just writing. I write a lot. I write a lot of designs, and I propose a lot of designs. So it's a very different day. A lot of collaboration, a lot of coding, a lot of writing, and it's one of the things I really like about it. It's just so varied. Some weeks are I speak so often I'm actually hoarse by the end of by Friday. I don't really have a voice. And other weeks I don't nearly talk as much, so that it's a lot more just writing.
Sounds like a very kind of various task depending on what the project is for the day.
Yeah.
I want to go back for a second in terms of your experience in high school and kind of tying that to your career now and seeing what if you don't mind sharing, what kind of student were you in high school? What kind of classes were you strong in? What kind of skills did you develop? And that kind of tied to what you're doing today.
Oh, good question. So in high school I was an A student, so I was working very hard in my classes, but I had no idea what I really wanted to do in the long term in terms of a career. So I knew that I was going to go to college, and I had an idea of what my major was going to be. Now, spoiler alert, my major that I thought of in high school did not turn out to be my major in college. And actually, my major is not computer science. I'm a major in economics. I
Hmm.
minored in computer science, and using that minor, using my major, I actually was able to still enter, be a software engineer, enter technology, but I also work at a financial company, so they both come in handy. And the reason why I mentioned that my major is not necessarily computer science is because a lot of what I worked on both in high school, that was my strength, and going into colleges, was math. Like I had a strong uh, interest in math. I really enjoyed calculus, which is a little weird to say, but I thought it just was very interesting. And so a lot of I like chemistry as well. So anything to do with numbers, uh, analyses, or complex situations in chemistry, you can have really complicated interactions. Well, software engineering, you can have really complicated system, the way how systems are integrated, talking with each other, and how they're integrated. So I think in high school though, because I didn't really have that idea, but I wanted long term. But I did work a lot on which putting time in for the grades, working, trying to build up really good quant skills. And then also I in high school I still do have had a passion just for other non-STEM related things. I really liked history, I like to write, and then through college is a really great time for me to hone a lot of those skills and to really get a lot of great feedback and mentorship from both my professors and as well as other classmates, friends of mine, as well as just study partners, and all of that culminating in I think taking those kind of rougher skills I had in high school and ultimately resulting in the role I am in now.
Yeah, definitely polished gem. Um,
Wow.
so with your education or the training that you have, is there anything other than your undergrad, your bachelor's degree that you benefit from or that's required for your job? Is there any additional training that happens aside from your college degree?
Oh gosh, it's a great question, and it's also another reason why I really like this field. There's a constant need to learn. Technology and finance as well are changing day to day. It's astonishing that just the rate of change we've seen, both from the past 20 years to the past decade to now what we'll probably see in the next 5 years. The technology space is just changing dramatically at a really high velocity. So you have to be someone who really enjoys to learn on the fly and really enjoys just a constant learning experience. And that was something I knew leaving college that I was trying to find. I wanted to go into a role where I felt that I was still learning, even though I wasn't in school anymore, that I was still picking up new experiences, new ideas, and new approaches to how to solve different problems. And so for me, that was a really crucial part, was to always kind of keep learning on the fly. And then there is a really big experience for me was actually not necessarily just school. It was actually a job I used to, summer job I used to have, where I work at a music festival, and I was actually, it was called utility worker, but we did a lot of garbage collection, repairing, miscellaneous things, moving heavy equipment. And now that doesn't sound at all like it relates to software engineering. And I agree, it really doesn't. One's a computer and one's moving things physically around. But what really stuck out to me, and that was where I learned a lot from, that was at this festival. It was a free music festival. There are a lot of different moving pieces, a lot of different, I had like 7 managers when I was working there, and they all had different requirements and asks. And there was a lot of things flying around, a lot of complicated things you have to keep in mind, keep in the back of your head as you're doing your job. That's the same thing I do now. There are a lot of different stakeholders, just different people and different teams, as well as different systems that I have to keep track of and keep in mind when I'm going through my role. And that summer job I had at the high school, and a little bit in college as well, for a couple years in college, was really helpful, just in terms of I got really good at keeping track of different asks from different people, managing my time, which comes in is vital for any role. In particular, I find that my role is very, very important, because it's just how many different projects I work with and different teams I have to work with. So I have to be really good with how I apply my time. And you can pick up all those skills from non-software related experiences, which is, for me, I think the biggest thing was having that role, having that job, that summer job. That wasn't, I was working at a summer festival, and it was a blast, very hard work, but I still learned a lot, and I still have to carry a lot of that learnings in my current job.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to dip back into the chat. There was a question about what program or website do you use to build?
What program or website? So so programming languages. So there are a lot of programming languages out there, and they are all good at doing different things. And I would say about 90%, like, they overlap in about 90%, all of them, in what they can do. And then that plus or minus 10%, that difference between them, is what really will help inform what you pick, what you use to solve a problem. I do a lot of TypeScript development, or JavaScript, if you've heard of that one. I've also used Python, which I know is another more commonly known language. It's very popular among data scientists, people who just would like to work with data. And Python is its syntax, which is just how you write it. It's very readable. Like, it almost looks like you're writing just normal text, but it's actually a programming language. So those are some programming language I use. And in terms of where do I build, well, these are a lot of my personal projects. So when I'm just at my house, and I work on my own software projects as well for fun, just to explore and to test things out. I use a lot of the AWS, so Amazon's cloud service, to build a lot of my infrastructure.
Okay, yeah, there was a follow-up question about, can you be a little bit more specific about good languages for students to learn if they are interested? Example, HTML, good for versus Python. Is Java still used? Where do I start to learn programming language?
These are great question. And I'm going to give a very imperfect answer, and I apologize for that. And the reason why it's imperfect is that it's going to be somewhat opinionated. So you might ask somebody else, and they'll have a different answer. So for me, Python, what was one of the languages mentioned in the question, is a very good language for data science, for analyzing data. You can build website servers in Python as well. It's a very good starter language, just because the syntax is very easy. There's a lot of documentation out there on Python. A lot of people use it, and that will make it much easier for you to if you hit a problem, to ask and find out possible solutions to it. If you're in Java, I guess the question is Java still in usage? The answer is yes, a lot. Java is still very much present in both the financial industry as well as the tech industry and others. It's very widespread. I have used Java before in the past. I can't say that I'm a huge fan of it. I think there are some instances where I prefer not to use Java. That being said, it is still very much in use. If you're interested in building websites, just that work in a browser, learning JavaScript, HTML, JavaScript, it will probably be the most useful there. You don't have to, if you do want to like just play around with websites, you can use what's called a static website generator. Something like maybe like called Hugo is one example. It's a Go-based static website generator. Go is another programming language that is pretty good to learn. So there's this whole there's a whole realm, and it really depends on what you want to do. But if I were to give you a very imperfect recommendation, I'd say if you want to get involved with learn more about data, and maybe play around with scraping some websites, or just kind of playing around with data sets that are out there and are freely available, Python's a great place to start. If you want to build your own website, just to kind of learn how all those pieces function, JavaScript or TypeScript, which is a superset of JavaScript, are good starter places. And HTML you'll often see it with that kind of JavaScript website building work.
Thanks for that advice. Kind of going back a little bit more generally about just the aspects of the job. Do you go into an office each day, or do you work from home? Do you get to travel for your job?
So I currently work hybrid. So I actually right now I'm in my house, but I do occasionally go into the office. Actually, I was just there last Friday. I met a bunch of people I'd never met before in person, so that was very interesting. Met my boss. And so do I travel for my work? Well, there hasn't been much travel the past couple of years due to COVID-19. However, there may be some instances where I would travel for work. It could be that I go to another office of ours to go do some work there and to meet and get some FaceTime with my coworkers in that other office. But for right now, for the foreseeable future, there hasn't been much travel. In that, not that I would need to necessarily travel very much either. I do work with teams around the globe. So I have worked, and this is a very interesting kind of time. This is my first time ever. It was my first time working with teams in different time zones, and I was still relatively new, about a year or so into my role. And I'd wake up in the morning and I'd work with a team based in Geneva, Switzerland. And then by the very end of the afternoon, I was speaking with another team in Japan. And the funny thing is, all three of those things, we were all the three of us, the three teams. So the Geneva team, myself, and California, and the team in Japan, we were all working together. And so I was the bridge between the other two, because they were very different in terms of time zones. So although I may not necessarily travel very much, I do work a lot with people all over the globe sometimes.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Here's a question. Did you encounter any challenges on your path to where you are today in your career?
I think, I guess the short answer is yes. There are challenges you will face, both in your career, in your personal life, in your academic life. And so they will be challenging. There'll be moments where it is quite difficult. For me, one of the biggest challenges, at least in starting the software engineering role, remember, I'm not a computer science major. I did have the minor in it, but I did not actually know that many. I knew the C programming language when I graduated from college very well. C is it's a very old language, and it's what runs our operating systems. Our computers run mainly on C. However, that's not, unless you're working on an operating system, you're not going to probably use C all that much. So when I actually started my role, I had to learn a bunch of new programming languages. I think in my first, as an intern, I learned at least two new ones I'd never worked with before at that time. And then when I joined full time, I had to pick up 5 different programming languages, all doing different things within the first year or so. So there was a lot to learn, and that was always very challenging, especially because when it comes to learning programming languages, there are always syntax differences, so how they're written, how the stylistic differences, so how you should write them and how they should look, even just the code itself. And then there will be functional differences. They can operate pretty differently depending on what you're using. Java and JavaScript do not run the same and are very much not the same language. So that was always kind of a challenge to learn all that, to properly organize it. But the way to tackle that was to use what I learned in college and high school, which is a lot of how I study, taking notes. So I had a whole notebooks full of just notes. I don't actually necessarily always read them, but just the process of writing is very helpful and helped me commit to memory and learn a lot of the concepts and new languages I had to pick up in that short time. And so what you do, how you learning in high school, how you adapt, and knowing how you can pick up and then retain information is really important. And it's going to be something that will always follow you throughout your life, whether it's, in whether your career changes through, one role to another, it's one of those constant eternal things. So having a really good idea of how you learn, which starts at high school, but even before that, how best you study, and if something doesn't work, to start shifting it to try to get back to effectiveness, it's very important.
We have a couple minutes left. What is your most favorite part of your job?
What is my most favorite? Ooh, so this is a difficult one. I think what I really enjoy about my job, and one of the things that almost feels magical in a way, even though it isn't, but is when we deploy or we, deploy, or you build something new, you make it available for usage. That's a very, very cool part of your day, because you can spend weeks, if not months, working on software, on something, on a new project, on a new system. And when it goes live, when it starts to work, once you start to see, the expected inputs, the outputs, and this could be they could be very complicated things. Could be a lot of calculations, could have to be very fast, could be doing machine learning. That's always for me one of the most interesting parts, is that because before we did that, there was nothing there, and all of a sudden there is something there working. So that was always very one of my best parts of the day for my job in general.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, and thank you, students and teachers, for logging in. Juan, one last piece of advice for students, anything that you think might help them be successful in their journey?
Ask questions. It's one of the things that I always try to do, even now, regardless of where I am, my career, as well as I did this in college and high school. Asking questions is just the single best way to get through instances where you don't know something or you're still curious about it. And believe me when I say, asking questions is not whatsoever seen as a sign that you don't know what you're doing, or that you're not interested, or that it's nothing negative. I should say nothing negative whatsoever. In fact, the opposite. I found that whenever I ask questions, people pick up on that and they start to take some more time on answering your questions, and because you're expressing interest, and interest is not always as common as you might expect. So asking those questions will not only get you the information you need, and that fill in those gaps, but people do notice that, and that is a sign that you are interested and that you want to take this further. And you'd be surprised where that can lead you.
Definitely. Well, again, students, thank you for logging in. Juan Anderson, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your journey and your expertise and your career. We appreciate it. And thank you guys for logging in.
Thank you for having me.